5. My landlady said, "Don't touch me there." I smiled and asked, "Then, where first?" What happened next changed everything. Moving into a new place always carries a mixture of excitement and anxiety, but this apartment had an unexpected weight to it. The building itself was charming, red brick, ivy climbing one side, and a faint scent of old wood and fresh paint that mingled in the hallway. As I wheeled my suitcase up the stairs, I noticed the soft creak of the steps under my weight and the faint hum of a refrigerator somewhere down the hall. Every small sound felt amplified, every little detail heightened by the nervous energy that came with starting somewhere new. And then I met her. My landlady opened the door before I could knock. She was tall, confident, yet carried a quiet warmth that softened her presence. Her hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, and the way she moved, unhurried, deliberate, suggested someone comfortable in her own skin. Her eyes met mine, and there was a spark of amusement, almost mischievous, that made my stomach flip. She smiled, and it was one of those smiles that felt like an invitation to both conversation and curiosity. "Welcome," she said, her voice calm but melodic, carrying an unexpected softness. "I'm your landlady, of course. I hope you'll like it here." There was something in the way she handed me the keys that lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. Her fingers brushed mine, light but deliberate, enough to make me notice the warmth of her skin. My pulse quickened, and I had to remind myself to breathe. The simplest gestures, the smallest touches, felt significant. As I stepped inside the apartment, she followed, showing me the little quirks of the place: a slightly wobbly cabinet, a radiator that hissed when it warmed, and the view from the small balcony where sunlight caught the city in golden streaks. She moved through the space with an ease I found mesmerizing, gesturing naturally, her hands brushing over surfaces, sometimes lingering near me as if subconsciously maintaining a connection. We made small talk, the usual questions about work, the neighborhood, favorite local cafes. But beneath the surface of mundane conversation, there was a subtle undercurrent of something else: curiosity, awareness, the kind of quiet tension that makes you notice every glance, every shift in posture. I caught myself observing the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, and the soft, almost imperceptible laugh that accompanied a teasing remark she made about the building's quirks. It was playful, but layered. Polite, but teasing. Every gesture hinted at something more, a quiet dance of awareness and attraction neither of us dared to name yet. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a magnetic pull towards someone entirely unexpected. As I set my keys down on the counter, she lingered a moment too long by the doorway, her gaze meeting mine just a second longer than it needed to. "If you need anything," she said, "don't hesitate to knock." I nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation and something deeper I couldn't quite name. This wasn't just moving into a new apartment, it felt like stepping into a story that was already quietly, irresistibly alive. Life in the new apartment quickly settled into a rhythm, though it was far from ordinary. Each day seemed to offer small opportunities to notice her in ways that made my chest tighten without warning. The landlady, confident, graceful, and quietly magnetic, became a constant presence, though she never intruded. Every interaction was a careful balance of politeness, observation, and I realized, an almost imperceptible dance of teasing tension. Morning sunlight would filter through the hallway windows as I passed her door on the way out. Often, she was there, sorting mail or watering plants, and she would offer a quick smile, small, but enough to make the day feel different. She had this habit of brushing her hair back from her face when she spoke, and sometimes, in that brief motion, her fingers would graze my arm. It was always accidental, or so it seemed. My pulse would spike, my thoughts briefly scatter, and I'd force myself to keep walking, trying to act like it was nothing. The first real spark of tension came one afternoon when I carried a stack of packages down the hallway. She opened her door to check on the mail at the same time, and our hands brushed as we both reached for a box. There was a sharp, electric jolt, the kind that makes your stomach twist and your heartbeat audible in your ears. She glanced up at me, and for a moment, the air seemed charged. Her lips curved into a knowing, almost teasing smile, and she muttered, "Don't touch me there." I couldn't help but grin. "Then, where first?" I replied, my voice casual, though my insides betrayed me with a nervous flutter. Her eyes widened just a fraction, and then she laughed softly, a sound that lingered in the hallway like sunlight trapped in glass. It was teasing, playful, but there was something in her gaze, a spark of curiosity and quiet amusement that made it clear she noticed more than she was letting on. That small exchange set the tone for the days that followed, teasing banter layered with subtle, unspoken tension. Even mundane chores became moments charged with significance. When I helped her carry groceries up the stairs, or when she leaned slightly into me to inspect a broken shelf, every brush of skin, every accidental touch seemed magnified. I found myself memorizing the warmth of her hands, the softness of her voice, and the way her laughter could suddenly fill a quiet space. And she, too, seemed attuned to my presence, leaning closer during conversation, holding eye contact just a second longer than necessary, letting the small closeness linger. But there was a delicate restraint on both sides. Neither of us crossed boundaries, yet the tension grew, threaded through casual touches, lingering glances, and quiet smiles that spoke louder than words. Every interaction left me more aware of her presence, and more aware of myself, a young man drawn to someone impossibly poised, confident, yet quietly vulnerable. By the end of the week, a new rhythm was established, playful remarks, small accidental touches, and the awareness that every shared space, the hallway, the stairwell, even the mailbox, could hold the quiet, electric possibility of something more. The apartment was no longer just a place to live, it was a stage where the slow, deliberate dance of curiosity and attraction had begun. The days passed, each one layering subtle familiarity over the quiet tension that had begun to build between us. Our interactions, once defined by polite greetings and teasing glances, were now threaded with something more intimate, the unspoken awareness of each other's presence and the hints of vulnerability that neither of us could ignore. It started in small, almost imperceptible ways. I noticed how her confident composure sometimes faltered when she thought no one was watching, a deep sigh as she sorted bills at her kitchen counter, a trace of weariness in her eyes as she glanced at a photo on the wall. There was a quiet elegance in her manner, but behind it, I sensed the weight of years, responsibilities, and perhaps unspoken regrets. And in those moments, my curiosity was coupled with an instinctive desire to offer comfort. One evening, as I returned from work, I found her struggling with a heavy grocery bag in the hallway. Without thinking, I stepped forward, taking the bag from her hands. Our fingers brushed briefly, the warmth of her skin lingering against mine. She smiled, a little embarrassed but also appreciative, and I caught the faintest tremor in her shoulders as she exhaled. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying more warmth than usual. I realized then that these small gestures mattered more than I had anticipated. Offering help became a way to bridge the unspoken distance between us, and every interaction felt charged with significance. When I fixed a wobbly shelf in her apartment, or helped her reach a stubborn cabinet, she would linger nearby, her hand brushing against my arm in casual gratitude. There was no overt flirtation, but the touch, the shared proximity, created a subtle intimacy that neither of us could deny. Even our conversations began to shift. Between discussions of mundane topics, the weather, neighborhood gossip, or favorite cafes, she would occasionally reveal a fragment of herself, a fleeting memory of her childhood, a quiet confession about a challenging project at work, or a wistful comment about a long-lost dream. She spoke with measured calm, but there was a softness in her eyes, a vulnerability that invited me in. And I, in turn, found myself listening with more attention, more care than I had ever expected to offer someone I barely knew. It was in these moments, the gentle touches, the shared laughter, the quiet exchanges, that I felt the first real stirrings of emotional closeness. Her presence became a constant point of focus, a gravitational pull that drew me in even when I tried to remain detached. I began noticing the small details, the way her fingers lingered on the edge of a table, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the warmth of her skin, the softness of her laugh when she thought no one was paying attention. And she, too, seemed to respond in kind, leaning slightly closer during conversation, letting her hand brush against mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary, sharing glances that carried more weight than words could convey. There was a delicate, unspoken agreement between us, a recognition of something growing, fragile yet undeniable, tethered to both curiosity and care. By the end of this chapter of days, it was clear our connection had begun to deepen. It was no longer just teasing or casual courtesy, it was the emergence of trust, awareness, and a subtle, quiet desire, a bond formed through shared vulnerability, delicate touches, and the recognition that beneath her confident exterior, she was as human, as tender, and as quietly magnetic as I had always sensed. The rhythm of our days had settled into something almost ritualistic, yet beneath that routine, a quiet tension was steadily mounting. We were no longer strangers merely passing in the hallway. We had become observers of each other's small habits, silent participants in the unspoken dance of curiosity, attraction, and restraint. It was in the quiet, in-between moments that the tension grew most palpable. A hallway conversation about nothing in particular, the weather, a minor repair, or the neighbor's noisy dog, could stretch into a subtle game of awareness. I noticed how her gaze lingered just a second too long, how her smile held a flicker of mischief or perhaps hesitation. Each glance, each shift in posture, felt laden with meaning, yet we spoke as though nothing had changed. One evening, she asked me to help move a box into the storage closet. The space was cramped, forcing us into close proximity. I felt the warmth of her body just inches from mine, the subtle brush of her arm against mine as we adjusted the box. Her breath brushed across my cheek, soft and unassuming, but my chest tightened with the awareness of her closeness. I caught her glance out of the corner of my eye, brief, fleeting, yet filled with a question neither of us dared voice. Every touch, however minor, became amplified. A guiding hand on her back while reaching for something on a high shelf, a shared laugh as we fumbled with furniture, these moments carried an electricity we both felt. The restraint was deliberate. Neither of us crossed boundaries, yet each interaction brought us closer, inch by inch, heart by heart. Even in casual conversation, there was a new layer of awareness. Her words were deliberate, measured, yet the pauses between sentences, the tilt of her head, the soft catch in her voice, all hinted at feelings held just below the surface. I found myself mirroring her movements, leaning slightly closer, keeping eye contact a heartbeat longer, aware of every subtle shift in her posture. And in those moments, a smile, a glance, a fleeting brush of fingers, however brief, spoke volumes. There was also a tension of hesitation. Both of us seemed conscious of the unspoken rules, social perception, age difference, personal boundaries. Yet the pull between us was undeniable. My mind constantly measured the distance between us, figuratively and literally, while my heart urged me to close the gap. She, too, seemed caught between curiosity and caution, her poised demeanor occasionally cracking in small, fleeting gestures, a sigh, a fleeting hand touch, or a momentary softness in her eyes. By now, even mundane tasks carried intimacy. Carrying groceries, checking mail, or sharing a cup of coffee became opportunities for lingering proximity. I noticed how her perfume seemed stronger when we stood close, how her hand felt warmer than expected, how a simple brush of fingers could send a ripple of electricity through me. It was a slow, deliberate tension, unspoken yet undeniable. By the end of this period, it was clear that something was growing, a bond threaded with mutual awareness, subtle longing, and emotional hesitation. We were both fully conscious of each other, drawn into a rhythm of proximity, lingering glances, and touches that left hearts racing while keeping bodies respectfully apart. The slow burn was in full effect, every glance, every brush of skin, every unspoken word adding fuel to the quiet fire that neither of us dared name aloud. The subtle tension that had built over days and weeks now felt like an invisible thread pulling us closer. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, there were no fireworks or grand gestures, but the quiet awareness of each other had deepened into something far more tender and complex. Each glance, each fleeting touch, carried weight, and the playful banter we shared was now infused with a softness that neither of us could ignore. It was one rainy evening when the unspoken feelings finally began to surface. I had knocked on her door, ostensibly to return a borrowed tool, but the storm outside created a cocoon of intimacy. Rain tapped gently against the window, filling the room with a soft, rhythmic backdrop that seemed to slow time itself. She invited me in to wait for the storm to pass, and I found myself stepping into a space that felt warmer, more private, and suspended from the rest of the world. We settled on the small balcony, the city lights blurred by the rain, sipping tea from chipped mugs that somehow felt perfect in that moment. Conversation flowed, easy and casual at first, but gradually it drifted into more personal territory. She spoke of work stress, missed opportunities, and the quiet regret of choices not made. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant at times, and I could see the vulnerability behind her composed exterior. I listened, fully present, feeling an urge to bridge the gap between us. At some point, my hand brushed against hers on the balcony railing. It was accidental, or so I told myself, but the warmth that spread from her skin to mine was undeniable. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand linger, just for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the connection we both felt but had been too cautious to name. "I sometimes feel like I'm too much for people," she admitted, her eyes meeting mine, glistening with unspoken emotion. "Too old, too complicated, too—" She trailed off, as if words might ruin the delicate tension in the air. I shook my head gently, a soft smile tugging at my lips. "No. Not too much. Not ever," I said. My fingers lightly covered hers, an intimate gesture that spoke more than words could. Her warmth was grounding, and the quiet steadiness of her hand under mine conveyed trust, curiosity, and a shared desire to understand what was unfolding between us. For a long moment, we simply sat, hands touching, listening to the rain. The air between us was thick with emotion, a delicate mixture of longing, hesitation, and newfound closeness. I could feel her heartbeat in subtle, rhythmic beats that matched the thrum of my own. Neither of us spoke, because we didn't need to. Our shared silence communicated everything: the tension, the attraction, the desire to cross boundaries yet remain mindful of each other. By the end of that evening, the unspoken had begun to be acknowledged. There was no rush, no pressure, only the quiet, growing awareness that we were not alone in this. We had crossed a threshold, however subtle, from teasing curiosity to emotional intimacy. It was a delicate, fragile step, but it was real, and it carried the promise of something far deeper than either of us had anticipated. By now, the connection between us had become undeniable, a quiet, magnetic pull that neither teasing words nor casual touches could disguise. The slow burn had reached its peak. Every glance, every accidental brush, every shared silence had layered desire and tenderness into a complex web of unspoken longing. But this time, it wasn't just about curiosity. It was about acknowledgement, about closeness that went beyond words or playful banter. It happened on a mundane afternoon that somehow became extraordinary. I had come by to help her with a broken cabinet hinge, a simple favor, really, but in her apartment, the air felt charged in a way it never had before. Sunlight spilled through the window, warming the room, and dust motes danced lazily in the golden rays. She bent down to inspect the cabinet, and as I reached to adjust a screw, our hands brushed. It wasn't accidental anymore. It was deliberate, lingering, and electric. I felt the warmth of her skin, the soft pulse of her fingers against mine, and a shiver of anticipation ran down my spine. When she straightened up, our eyes met. There was a hesitation there, a delicate moment where the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us. I noticed how her chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm, the soft curve of her shoulders, the faint blush that colored her cheeks. I could feel my own heart pounding, a mix of excitement, nervousness, and longing. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, though it was clear we were both acutely aware of the electricity between us. She smiled, a little shy, a little amused, and stepped closer. "I am now," she replied, her voice carrying a warmth that reached straight to my chest. There was no need for grand confessions. Everything was communicated through subtle gestures. The way she let her hand rest near mine on the cabinet, the gentle tilt of her head, the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing. As we worked together, our proximity allowed for brief, meaningful touches. A guiding hand on her back while bending to adjust a hinge, a fleeting brush of shoulders as we maneuvered the cabinet, and finally, a hand lingered on hers, fingers entwining naturally. It was intimate yet respectful, a first acknowledgement that our bond had moved beyond teasing curiosity into genuine closeness. At one point we paused, hands still touching. Her eyes met mine, and there was no need for words. She leaned slightly, just enough for her hair to brush my shoulder, and I felt the gentle warmth of her body against mine. It was a simple, quiet gesture, yet it carried the weight of trust, desire, and vulnerability. Our breaths mingled in the shared space, and for a few timeless moments, the world outside ceased to exist. By the end of the afternoon, the dynamic between us had subtly shifted. There was an unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement that our connection was real, tender, and profound. The playful tension remained, but it was now infused with a depth of intimacy that neither of us had dared to explore before. We had crossed the delicate threshold of physical closeness, experiencing the thrill of first touch without ever compromising the respect and emotional depth that had brought us together. In that golden-lit apartment, with the faint smell of fresh paint and her lingering perfume, I realized the slow burn had finally ignited, and it was only the beginning of something far more tender, heartfelt, and transformative. The days that followed felt lighter somehow, though no single moment defined the change. Our connection had matured, evolving from teasing glances and playful touches into something steady, quiet, and profoundly tender. The slow burn had finally blossomed into warmth, a rhythm of companionship that felt both comforting and thrilling, a delicate balance of respect, affection, and shared understanding. We no longer tiptoed around our feelings, yet neither did we rush. Simple gestures carried meaning, a hand brushing hers across the counter while making coffee, leaning slightly closer to share a laugh over a minor mishap in the kitchen, or a lingering smile across the room that said more than words ever could. Each day, the intimacy grew, not through dramatic confessions or grand gestures, but through the quiet, sustained attention we gave to each other, noticing the small details, respecting boundaries, and savoring the closeness that had been carefully earned. One morning, I found myself joining her on the balcony to watch the sunrise. The city below was still wrapped in the soft haze of early light, and the air was tinged with the faint scent of rain from the previous evening. She held her coffee in both hands, the warmth radiating through her fingers, and I couldn't help but notice the curve of her shoulders and the gentle tilt of her head as she took in the view. I reached over, lightly brushing my fingers against hers, and she let them linger, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between us. Conversation flowed easily, filled with shared memories, quiet jokes, and reflections on the small moments that had brought us to this point. There was no urgency, no pressure, only a sense of mutual understanding and emotional safety. I realized that the playful tension, the teasing remarks, and the hesitant touches had all been part of a process, a slow, deliberate journey toward connection, intimacy, and trust. We began to create small rituals of closeness. Evening walks in the neighborhood became our shared escape, our hands brushing or fingers entwining naturally as we strolled. Movie nights in the apartment, sitting side by side with our shoulders touching, became a quiet celebration of companionship. Every gesture, no matter how minor, was imbued with the warmth of affection and the comfort of mutual respect. Her vulnerability, once carefully guarded, was now something she allowed me to see, and in turn, my own hesitation had softened. The age gap, which had once felt like an invisible boundary, had become irrelevant in the presence of this deep emotional intimacy. We moved together through life's ordinary moments with a sense of shared understanding, our relationship defined not by social expectations, but by the quiet, steady bond we had built. As the day ended and the city lights flickered on below, we found ourselves on the balcony again, sitting side by side. Her hand rested lightly on mine, our fingers intertwined, and I felt the steady warmth of her presence, the unspoken acknowledgement of everything we had shared. A soft smile passed between us, a mutual recognition that the slow, careful journey of connection had reached a place of contentment and joy. It was not a dramatic climax, nor did it need to be. The story of us, of teasing glances, lingering touches, and unspoken understanding, had found its resolution in warmth, emotional closeness, and the quiet beauty of a bond built slowly, respectfully, and lovingly. And in that moment I knew that what we had was real, lasting, and profoundly ours.